I was distracted.
The radical fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is
all right, everybody. Welcome to Ron Brooks Show on this, what is it? It's Tuesday. I'm a little jet lagged and a little confused. Hopefully you all having a fantastic week. I am back. You can see I'm back in Puerto Rico. Got here yesterday. I was planning to do a show yesterday, but I was on like 3 hours sleep the night before, and I just couldn't bring myself to do it. So I kind of collapsed last night. Spent, what was it, 2.5, almost 3 weeks in California. Mostly great, but I was in this major car accident on the highway in California. So it was not nice. It was not pleasant at all. Luckily, cars have airbags. So other than some scrapes and bruises, I came out okay. My wife, less okay. She survived, but you know, more injured than I am. But it was spooky and scary. And the thing that really hit home was how dependent we are on the rationality of other people. There's a whole show there to be done, right? So I'm driving on the left-hand lane. A guy's in front of me and on the lane next to, and he suddenly does a 90-degree turn, and I hit him on the side. He's got his girlfriend. He's got 3 kids in the car with him. Turns out he's intoxicated. My car is totaled. It's a rental car, totaled. Police were great, I have to say. The ambulance services were great. Took my wife off to emergency room and everything. And I mean, everybody was fantastic. But imagine going out driving with your 3 kids in the back seat when at 12:30 in the middle of the day. So what, you had a couple of Bloody Marys or something for breakfast or something, and you went on the road. And it was just one of those where I had no control, right? I just rammed into him. I don't even know if I pressed the brakes. I can't remember because it happened like that, right? So he was just there. And that sensation of hitting him, and basically what I saw is his car coming like that to me. That was scary. That was very spooky. So very unpleasant. It of course affected the rest of the trip. Yeah, that was not fun. Oh, we've got Daniel here as well. Let me just get him on board. But other than that, it was a good trip. So I got to see a lot of people, a lot of friends, and we got to eat a lot of good restaurants. Got to see my son, and yeah, it was overall a really, really good trip. Went up to the Bay Area. Accident happened on the 101, for those of you who know LA, north of Los Angeles, on the way up to the Bay Area. I chose to go on the 101 instead of the 5 because it's a nicer drive. Didn't turn out that way. So, but yeah, people are driving next to you. Now, the trauma I have is when I drive now, I imagine all the things that could go wrong, like all the things people could do to kill me. And of course, there are millions of those little instances that can happen. So I have to get over that to get back to my normal driving habits. I was driving calmly, safely, and below the speed limit for a change. So, you know, out of your control completely. All right. Let us see. But it's good to be back. It's good to be back in Puerto Rico. It's good to be back doing shows. It's unfortunately, I'm back on the road very soon. So this, I'll try to do as many shows as I can before I leave. But I will be going to Asia on the 13th of September. So in 2 weeks, really. I'll see how I do shows from there. The time zones will be weird, and exactly what time of day I can do a show. Probably in the evening over there will be morning over here. No, morning over there will be evening over here. So I think I'll do them early in the morning in Korea and Japan, and that way. And I think I've got my mornings free except for one day, so we can make that happen. And then I'll be in South America for a while. And if anybody's interested in the schedule and the events and so on, it'll be on my website. If you're in Asia or if you're in South America, we'll be in Brazil, Argentina, and maybe in Peru, maybe in Lima. We'll see. But all of that will be up on my website and and on the Ayn Rand Institute website as well. So you can find information about these events there. If you happen to be from there, hopefully a lot of the Brazilian listeners are coming to our conference in São Paulo at the end of the month. All right, with that, we will jump into with our panelists let me just change the view here to speaker view. There we go. And we'll jump into a Q&A with our panelists. Of course, you can use the super chat to ask questions. As always, we have an ambitious goal for the super chat. Not a lot of people watching live. I think once I get off the schedule, it takes a while for people to get back onto the schedule if they seem to watch afterwards. So hopefully we'll get more people watching as the evening goes on. All right, let's start with Adam. You're on.
First of all, refuah shleima to your wife.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, you mentioned among Korean serials that you saw My Country. I don't know if you know about it, but there is a series that is in spirit, although not in the people involved, in the same kind of spirit and style about the next king after the one in My Country. It's called The Deep-Rooted Tree.
Okay.
And it's a very romantic type of story. People who have deep values for which they live very effectively, but eventually they give up their lives for the things, for their values, but there is no fatalism. They are completely in control of their lives, and they're going about being in control of their lives and pursuing their values with great competence. So I highly recommend The Deep-Rooted Tree. Good.
I look forward to seeing it. I'm looking for those kind of historic dramas. I find I enjoy them more than the Korean dramas that are set in the present.
And now for something completely different.
Okay.
Essentially, you are very much on record as being against government regulatory agencies other than the legislature itself.
Yep.
Now, there are situations, as we saw in the last pandemic, where in order to know how not to infect other people, you depend on experts.
Yep.
And yet there can be no such thing as a right to infect other people.
Yep.
So as a matter of protecting rights, the government will have to have experts setting up standards about how you go about not infecting other people and not infecting them. So I think that calls for at least one expert body that can act quickly and change its recommendation as new knowledge comes in.
Yeah, so that's right. So I think that you can include this under the policing function of government. That is the need to help identify and define threats. And it could be, by the way, bioterrorism. It doesn't have to be even a natural occurrence. But as far as national defense, you would need an agency that dealt with bioterrorism. I think something like the CDC, shrunken, focused just on infectious diseases, just on bioterrorism and threats like that, would be appropriate. It would have no regulatory power. It would have power to both provide the policing function with information about who is violating rights potentially and who is not, what constitutes that. It would advise the equivalent of Congress, it would advise the legislature on threats to individual rights, or in the case of bioterrorism, it would advise the military on threats, on ways in which the military can handle them and the ways in which, so where it is exactly housed, it would be housed in the executive. But something like the CDC is a legitimate part of government, but it would be significantly shrunk. If you think about the CDC today, it's responsible for something called public health, which goes far beyond infectious diseases. It's much broader than that, and goes far beyond kind of the threats. Plus, the CDC actually engages in actions that have, as we saw, that are beyond the scope of just protecting rights. You're not a threat to somebody else if you test negative. And if you test negative, therefore, certainly if you test negative, and you're not, you cannot be forced to behave in particular ways. So the legislature would have to write special laws that relate to pandemics. Onkar Ghate wrote an excellent paper for the Ayn Rand Institute articulating what that would look like. I encourage people to go and read that. It's on the Ayn Rand Institute website. And then you would need an entity that advised the kind of policing function that results from that. But it wouldn't be a policy department. It would be an advisory body of experts that, by the way, most of the experts wouldn't even reside in it, because I think there's something corrupting about a scientist working for too long and too deeply with government. I think most of the experts would be academics that this agency would use in times of emergencies to aggregate the best information possible and to give it the best advice possible.
Although I think they would need to be prepared.
Yes, so they would have to have some labs. You can imagine them doing some research on, particularly for the bioterrorism aspect of it, for known pathogens or things that they would expect would be dangerous, and they would be engaged in some research. But I think most of that research would be done outside. They would be the one funding it. You could imagine some stuff would be secret that they would want to be as part of the military. I mean, all of that would need to be worked out. But the problem with the CDC is that it has people who work there for decades, and it has a massive bureaucracy, and it is responsible for, I think, advice about what lunches children should have on their lunch break in school and things like that, rather than being laser focused on the threat of infectious diseases and everything that entails.
That's great. By the way, I should tell you about my own personal experience now that I can look back on it. We do have a cure for COVID. We have plaques of it, so it's not the threat that it used to be.
Yep.
But I avoided ever getting it by, number one, getting a second dose of vaccine before it was permitted. The CDC would not permit Americans to have a second dose
That's part
until
of,
a majority were vaccinated.
that's part of the CDC going outside of its scope. It should have no involvement in vaccines. Vaccines are a private issue, both financially and from a development perspective and from the perspective of whether you choose to be vaccinated and how many times and at what age. And that should be a market issue, not a issue for the government.
In any case, I found a way to break the law and get my second dose of vaccine before it was official.
Good, good.
And I also got my third booster, even though to this day, it's illegal to get more than 2 boosters. But the outcome has been that even though I was in places where a considerable number of people got COVID, I never got it.
That's great. That's great. Thanks, Adam. All right, Jennifer.
What do you think about laws, like customs laws that where they want to keep certain insects out of the country because they'll damage crops or something, so they won't let you bring like fruit in or something? Do you think there's any legitimacy to that?
Wow, I've never thought of that. I think that if somebody can show that there is a real objective threat to their property, it is part of the government's job to, just like we don't want people bringing in viruses that are dangerous. Now, how damaging is an issue, right? If it's minimal, if it's not a big deal, it's like the cold or flu. We don't stop people. We shouldn't stop people at the border for that. But if it's Ebola or AIDS, Ebola we certainly do. Yeah, you'd have to really think that through and know more about it. But yeah, I don't think that is completely illegitimate. It's partially the real question is how do you enforce it? Because what they don't have a right to do is to stop random cars on the highway like they do in California, where they have checkpoints, and search your car for fruit or something like that. I think if you're caught bringing something in, okay, there's a fine or something like that. But I don't see how they search you, and the same with the borders. Open your suitcases. I mean, they once found, they opened my suitcases at the airport and they found nuts that I had bought at Trader Joe, taken overseas and brought back to the US. And they were upset that I was bringing nuts into the country, even though I'd bought them in the US. So it's just ridiculous. But what right do they open all my suitcases? So how you enforce it, I don't know. But certainly there could be, laws that say don't bring this in, and we will punish you if you do ex post. It's a tough one in terms of enforcement.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Jennifer. John.
Can you hear me okay? Am I not lagging?
Yeah, you're good now.
All right, perfect. I do have a question. I'm an insurance salesman for home and auto in my free time. So I have a question. Liability is mandated in 48 states. That's what you pay out in the event that you injure somebody. It's at least the New York standards, the minimum is $25,000. I think that goes the majority across the states. I'm wondering, is forcing somebody to have liability insurance, do you think, an infringement on somebody's rights, even though the goal of it is to pay for the protection of somebody else if you hurt them in an accident, like what happened with you in California?
Yeah. The first question I was asked is, does he have insurance? I don't know if he does. I think he does, but the police suggested he does. No, I don't see how the government can get involved in that. You would have to find mechanisms to make it particularly bad for people who didn't have insurance and who've landed up being liable for damage to support somebody else. So, for example, we have a very slow, inefficient court system today. So if I bring a suit against the guy who caused my accident, it's going to take forever. It's going to be expensive. It's going to be difficult. We should devise ways to make that cheap, easy, and and make it enforceable. So the police would enforce the claim against him, right? Right now, it's very hard to enforce these claims, very hard to get at him. But if he had a sense that if he did something, yeah, his wealth, his entire wealth is jeopardized by that. That would, I think, incentivize. But I don't see how you could, the other thing that could happen is, yeah, I mean, it's not clear you need a driver's license in a free society, although I think that would be a requirement for an insurance company to give you insurance, would be to pass some kind of test where they issued a driver's license or somebody issued a driver's license. But no, I mean, you maybe, for example, car companies would not sell you a car, if you didn't have insurance. I mean, there might be other market mechanisms, depending on how we structured our liability laws, that increase the incentive to get insurance. But no, I mean, I, for example, have a very large umbrella insurance. If you do work in my house and something happens and you get hurt, I've got an umbrella insurance that would cover that and pay you off, right? Some people don't. And you break your arm doing work for them, and you can sue them, but it's going to take you time, and the same kind of thing. Car is not any different than that in a sense. Right?
Dude, may I add one more quick thing on top of that?
Yep.
Just ask. Let me ask. So, 25,000 is a very low limit, which I would never recommend to any of the clients, just because a night in a hospital is probably at least 40,000. Yep. So you're short 15 at that point. Do you think that until we get rid of these laws and go for the laissez-faire attitude that we're pursuing here, do you think that they should have any government intervention to bump it up to 100,000 as a minimum?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm still generally supportive of the less government, the better. The more we try to use government to make the system as it is more efficient, in a sense, the more we're gonna, the more we're going to entrench it. Let the system break. It's one way in which we're gonna make an argument to fix it, is if it's broken. So I don't like to see them piling on more regulations to fix the old regulation. There's no end to it. And there's so many places where liability coverage is not enough, or this is not enough, or that is not enough, and we could pass a law. There's no end to that, and we just get bigger and bigger government. So no, I don't think we should advocate for that. Would I vigorously fight against a law like that? No, but I wouldn't support it.
Yeah, I would agree. That's what we're here for, to destroy the system.
Yeah. Well, yes, to see the system collapse one way or the other. All right, Daniel.
There we go.
Yep.
Isn't the problem sometimes deciding what is really dangerous, deadly? I mean, we've got flooding going on in Pakistan, had it in Sydney, had it in Yellowstone, all supposedly, according to the experts, due to climate change. There's been droughts at the same time in Italy and someplace else. I don't see it in my notes at the moment. Yeah. European Central Bank is making climate crisis a key priority. If you go to academics and ask them, they'll all say it's because of the fossil fuels. This is dangerous to people. We have demonstrable evidence that climate change is killing people. So yeah, I'm very scared of letting the government decide, where and when we should use fossil fuels.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the government shouldn't be in that decision-making process. It should have nothing to do with fossil fuels at all. I mean, all their land should be sold, not leased. They should sell it tomorrow, all of it. I mean, the best way to pay down the national debt is basically to sell all the government land. I don't think that'll cover it, but it'll get us much closer. I remember, man, this is a long time ago, but just to give you a sense of a different America, in 1982, maybe under Reagan, there was a cover story. It was either Times or Newsweek. I was at my grandparents' home, and they were subscribing to Times or Newsweek. This is in Israel in the early 80s. Reagan was president, and the cover story was, how much of America is Ronald Reagan going to sell to raise revenue for the government to pay off the debt? He never did it, but there were pictures there of lighthouses in Oregon and coastal property in the plains. 75% of all the land west of the Mississippi, 75% is owned by some federal or state or local government. So all of that should be sold with the mineral rights, with everything. Government getting involved in these things can only cause disaster, whether it's because of climate change or because they want to milk the royalties they get out of the fossil. Israel is a good example of that. They discovered natural gas in Israel, off the coast of Israel in the Mediterranean years ago. I can't remember exactly when, but probably about 10 years ago. A Texas company did it. And at the time, the Israeli government had a contract with them. We get, 5% of whatever you find. Because really, the Israeli government thought they're never going to find anything with a land of milk and honey, not oil and natural gas. That's the Saudis. That's these that was given to our cousins, not to us. The Bible is very clear on that. So they agreed to a low rate. And then they hit the jackpot. I mean, a massive find of natural gas off the coast of Israel in the Mediterranean, enough natural gas for Israel for at least 100 years. They are now signing contracts to export natural gas to Europe. But the problem was, at that point, the Israeli government said, whoa, wait a minute. No, we gave you too good of a deal. We can't do that. That's not acceptable. And they spent the next 5 years negotiating instead of developing the natural gas. Lost 5 years of development, and we might be able to supply a lot of they might be able to supply a lot of the natural gas Europe needs from the Russia thing. But because they reneged on the contract, that's government. Government can renege on a contract because it is the arbiter of contracts, right? So they can say, whoops, no more. So it's yes, government should have nothing to do with energy, not just fossil fuel. Nothing to do with energy, nothing to do with the economy, nothing to do with contracts, nothing to do with trade. There should no tariffs. That's it. No sanctions unless you're embargoing. The only thing government can do is say, this country is an enemy. Trading with an enemy state is treason. We are embargoing this country. That's it. That's the one thing government can do with regard to trade. So yeah, I mean, so much would go away, and a lot of those experts have the position that they do because it's a position they're expected to have by the government, who provides them with the research grants, and they wouldn't get the research grants if they didn't have that position. So it's completely and utterly corrupt, and yeah, needs to be done away with. Absolutely.
Agreed.
Separation of state from economics. Point 2 in my revised constitution, Bill of Rights or whatever. Yeah. Thanks, Daniel. Ian.
Hey, you're on. Just one quick thing. At the end of OCON, it was mentioned that there's going to be an Ayn Rand con in Athens.
Yeah.
Are those intended for anybody? Like, I kind of get the impression that those are for like young people and beginners and things like that. But it would be awesome to go to Athens.
Yes, it would be awesome to go to Athens. I think it's a combination. So the way in particular they're doing Athens is it's going to be a combination of material for beginners, for young people, to get them excited about objectivism and get them engaged, and content about Greece, Greek philosophy, Greek history, and just being there, what it means. So I think there's going to be a combination of content around that conference. I think Tal at the Institute is talking to a bunch of scholars who've done ancient philosophy and people interested in the history in history, and trying to organize a conference that'll have a lot of good content for people who don't need the introductory objectivist stuff. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I mean, details, hopefully soon. All I know is I'm going. I don't know anything more than that. Well, I've been told I'm going, so I've tried to get out of it, but they won't let me out. So, so it's happening. They've got a date. They've got dates. I think it's the first weekend in April, but they don't have the content of the program yet.
Cool. Now, that was just a short one. Yeah, if I can do another one. Have you heard about or seen the HBO show, The Anarchists?
Is this the one with them like taking over a neighborhood in some country?
It's Acapulco.
Acapulco in Mexico. That's right. They take over the neighborhood and they have these conferences at the hotel. I haven't seen it. I've read about it. It sounds like you'd expect a libertarian anarchist group to be, and then they accuse us of having schisms.
Yeah,
Their schism is a little bit more violent.
Yeah, it's really actually interesting watching and just seeing what happens when people don't have kind of positive values to go along with this negative, let's just get rid of organization and the government. And what happens if you don't have that. So it's really worth watching.
Okay. I'll try if I can stomach it. I'll try to watch it. But yes, I read an article about it. Unfortunately, as always, Ayn Rand was mentioned in it because Ayn Rand inspires them. So the sad thing about all these wacky libertarian projects is that we get roped into the wacky libertarian bandwagon. It's one of the reasons I emphasize so much. I'm not a libertarian. I'm not on their side. I'm not an ally. I'm not in their tent because their tent is crazy. I mean, and the show has crazy people in it. We're not part of that tent.
Absolutely. Even though they're one of the main people that's focused on his pseudonym is John Galton, and there's a Juan Galton, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's being associated with them is bad news. So
yeah, and unfortunately we try to distance ourselves, but that doesn't stick, partially because our opponents don't want it to stick, right? They want to make sure we're associated with them because it's a way to discredit us. So it's the media has no interest in figuring out exactly who's who. Okay, so it's HBO. All right, I'll try. I'll try and watch it. All right, let's. I'm going to take a few $20 plus super chat questions. Michael is okay. We got a bunch of Michael questions, but they're not 20. Okay, that Doodle Bunny. If animals don't have any rights whatsoever, because they have no capacity for reason and self-improvement, why does a severely mental deficient person or person in a vegetative state have any right to life? I mean, they have a right to life because they are fundamentally human and they are granted, the status of what they were or what they could be. Now, note that a person in a vegetative state, rights don't mean that much to them, right? Because they're in a vegetative state, you in a sense, you don't have the right to go and murder them. But what else do they have, right? They can't enforce anything. They in a sense, you can disconnect the machines from them, so you can kill them, but there's a certain process to do it. But rights don't mean that much in that context. So rights are something that definitely adjusts to the context. Children don't have the same rights, or rights are not associated with them in the same way or protected in the same way as an adult does. You don't treat somebody who's a vegetative state the same way as you do somebody who's completely calm. And you don't treat a significantly mentally deficient person the same way. Do they have full rights? No. So you adjust the way you deal with rights, the way you enforce rights, the way you protect rights, to the context in which you're dealing. Now, animals never have. It's a zero rights status. And I know many of you who love animals, that upsets you, but that's a reality. I'm thinking, I'm not going to reveal it. Oh, wait, there's a project that Jonathan Honing is working on. He'll have to tell you about it sometime that relates to pets. He'll have to reveal it when he's ready. But it's the fact that they are potentially and to some extent fully rational, and they get the protection of rights, but again, they don't get it fully. You could institutionalize mentally if they really can't take care of themselves, or there are lots of ways in which you can limit their freedom. You can limit their, they don't have understanding of rights. So there are limitations that are contextual. All right, Liam asks, it seems the trend was humanity recognized fascism, communism were horrific failures. Then we got mixed economies and people would realize those are failures and laissez-faire would be ushered in. However, it seems we are migrating back to fascism. Yes, and because people didn't understand the fundamental nature of fascism and communism. And not only are we gravitating towards fascism, but communists are respected, socially is a respected ideology in spite of their failures, because they never identify the cause. They never identify what's at the core, at the root of fascism and communism. So maybe if we try again, it'll work out next time. Maybe if we strip racism from fascism, it'll work. Although I'm not sure the fascists are actually doing that or will do that. What if we strip authoritarianism from socialism? Maybe that'll work. Because if you discover that at the heart of fascism and communism is altruism, and at the heart of fascism and communism is a form of mysticism, an epistemological mysticism, that is a negation of reason, then, God, you have to rethink those things. You have to rethink all of your most basic fundamental ideas, and people are just not quite ready to do that yet. This is where it's way too early in human evolution, not biological evolution, but cultural evolution, social evolution. We're just not at the point where we're ready to really question altruism and some form of mysticism. And we will only do that when we're willing, when we're willing to dig in and really question those. We will only reject them when we're willing to question those fundamental ideas, fundamental beliefs, philosophical beliefs. As long as we think that mysticism and altruism are okay, we will try to bring them into reality better this time. This time we'll get it right. Right? But that's what they both rely on, and that's what's not being challenged, not being questioned. And that's our job. That's why it's so important to go to the heart of it. So important to question the epistemology, to question the morality. It's so quite important to do the philosophical work to show what their ideas, what philosophical ideas their ideas are based on, and challenge those and bring about a revolution there. Our revolution is not a political revolution. It's not even it's not a political revolution. It is fundamentally an epistemological and moral revolution. It's all about epistemology and morality. And if we don't get those, we don't convince people, we don't change their mind about those, then we failed. Statism is the ultimate outcome of any mystical, altruistic ideology. It has to be, and that's why religion has to lead to fascism ultimately over time, and that's why secularized mysticism in the form of kind of Plato, a Platonic view of the world, always leads to some form of authoritarianism and statism. Good question, Liam. All right, Harper Campbell. How do evil people often know exactly where to attack psychologically and epistemology? Well, because evil people tend to be very focused on exactly that, other people, and the focus. This is also with Tui in The Fountainhead, and the whole depiction of him. What he's really good, what he's focused his mind on, what he puts his energy towards, is understanding the psychology of people and manipulating that, and learning by manipulating them what works, what doesn't work, what works on what kind of people, how to do it. And that's where all their energy goes into. Whereas healthy people are almost exclusively focused on reality, on dealing with reality, on solving problems in reality, on shaping reality, exploiting reality. using the data from reality to live a better life. Evil people have mastered the skill of manipulating other people. That's what they focus on. That's what they put their energy towards. Whatever thinking they do, if you can call it thinking, it's focused on that. And again, I think the description of Ellsworth Tui and the Fountainhead is perfect when it comes to this, right? All right, last super chat for now, that Doodle Bunny. How hard should you beat yourself for past mistakes you did when you were younger, even if what you did was malicious and criminal? I mean, you need to beat yourself as much as necessary to make sure you never do it again, to understand, internalize, integrate the wrongness of what you did, to understand why you did it, and to eradicate that from your character and from your soul. You need to also recompense. So if you did it to somebody else, you need to find a way to compensate them for the damages that you did, as part of forgiving yourself. I don't think you can really forgive yourself until you've done that. So I think doing malicious and criminal things is really, really, really serious. I mean, criminal, assuming the crime is a real crime, right? It's a rights violating crime, and you need to beat yourself up to the point where it's gone, and then you need to figure out how to compensate those who you've damaged, and that, then you can be back in a sense on the bandwagon of justice, right? Because otherwise you're always going to have this feeling that you're unjust, even though you understand it was wrong, you'll never do it again, but that was unjust. And to remedy that, you have to find a way to compensate for it. All right, we're back to our panelists. Adam? Adam is gone.
Sorry, I stepped away for a moment.
There you are.
But I do have another thing to bring up,
Okay.
which is the question of how objective is the American legal system. Now, I recall Leonard Peikoff, in answer to a question after one of his Fort Hall Forum talks, bringing up the post-Enlightenment French legal system that was adopted by and improved by several other European countries, including Switzerland, which essentially is based on the idea that one can objectively know the reality of what happened in a criminal case. And the job of the court is to establish the facts. And the function of the defense counsel is to make sure that no one is ignoring whatever facts may exonerate the defendant. But the function of the court is to establish the truth.
Yep.
Whereas in the existing American legal system, the lawyers for each side are free to cherry pick the evidence that favors their side. It becomes a kind of sport and is historically descended from trial by combat.
Yep. Yeah.
How objective can the American legal system be without converting it to the post-Enlightenment objective model?
Yeah, I mean, Leonard Peikoff talked about this after the O.J. Simpson trial, which was clearly a very non-objective trial. He basically came out against the system of oppositional, an oppositional legal system where the job of the defense attorney is to do whatever they can to defend their client, no matter his guilt, and the job of the prosecutor is to prosecute no matter what. I think Leonard made a very convincing case that is a more objective system, where I think it's a French system, where basically the judge and both lawyers, the three of them, the court, if you will, is responsible for discovering the truth. And the judge has a much bigger role. And the judges are often investigative judges. That is, the judges are often looking at the evidence, investigating it as part of kind of the police procedure. The judges are engaged. And so is the prosecutor and potentially defense attorney. So, the whole focus is on
not exactly. The part of the system is that investigations are not conducted by the executive, but by a special magistrate in the judicial branch.
That's right.
And the qualification, at least in a series of novels about an investigating magistrate in Portugal, the requirement for that investigating magistrate is a degree in STEM. That is, that particular magistrate has a degree in chemical engineering, but it could be any science as long as it's something that's centered on objective establishment from the evidence, rather than trying to argue one case or the other. And so the investigating magistrate handles identical dossiers, that is, files of evidence that he has collected if he decides it's worth a trial. The defense and the prosecution and the judge get identical files with the evidence.
Yep. No, I think it makes, that system makes a lot more sense. It is, the British system and the American system are adversarial systems, and you lose that objectivity. Now, how objective are American courts? I think for the most part they get it right, but yes, they can be easily be manipulated. Juries can be manipulated emotionally, and you do get this attitude of defense attorneys, which is to do anything in order to get the client off, which I think is non-objective and not just, and problematic. So, exactly how you would create the ideal system, I don't know. You would have to have, again, legal philosophers thinking about this and coming up with something.
However, it carries over into the American patent system. We have a patent system in which the actual invention is not what matters. And even if the actual invention has been instantiated in practice,
it's fine.
Dozens and dozens of times, it can still, other applications of the same concept, which technical people already understand from the prior art, from what already exists, you can still get a patent on additional applications of the same concept, which a technical person would immediately recognize.
Yeah, so I don't know enough about the patent system. I'll leave that to future legal scholars to figure out how to do that properly. I think the patent system, for all from the work Adam Ossoff has done, at least, professor at George Mason University, the American patent system seems to work pretty well. So I'm reluctant to chuck it yet, but I'm sure it could be improved by a more objective legal system. All right. Thanks, Adam. Jennifer?
Do you know who Peter Hitchens is?
Yes.
Okay. I think he's worse than Christopher, I think. He's pretty bad.
Well, Christopher was better than him.
Yeah.
He is a straight down the line conservative. And right now, I think pro-Russia.
Yeah.
Pro-Russia. I like Christopher Hitchens with all his craziness, and
Yeah, he was better than Peter for
he
sure.
was super smart and super articulate, and thought Ayn Rand was really bad, but treated her with respect in the sense that she was the threat. He was smart enough to know this objectivism stuff needs to be taken seriously. We need it, because he would often mention objectivism in his talks as this oppositional force. He took it much more seriously than other people. But yeah, Peter, Christopher Hitchens was an atheist. Peter is a Christian. Yeah, I mean, I was a somewhat fan of Christopher Hitchens, particularly once he abandoned his socialism. Not a fan of Peter Hitchens. I'm supposed to. They keep trying to get a debate between me and Peter Hitchens in England to happen. I think he's agreed in principle, but we've never really made it happen. Hopefully, one of these days it'll happen.
Yeah, like the other day he said that it's idiotic to have a philosophy, basically, because if you do, you're dogmatic. But then he said the reason there's a lot of crime right now in London is because people aren't religious. So
Yes, so they believe philosophy is bad, principles are bad.
Unless they're Christian.
What you need is religiosity, which is much more flexible in terms of its principle. Who did I read that just said the same thing? Yeah, I mean, there's a conservative, another British conservative somebody just sent me a video of him. Exactly the same thing. Principles are bad, ideas are bad, just follow Christianity. So they believe in dogma, not principles, right? They believe in blind obedience.
Yeah, he sort of reminds me of William Buckley because he's got this voice like he's so intelligent. No,
almost all British people remind me of William Buckley. I mean, all educated Oxford, the ones that work in their Oxford accent, that have it down pat. The common Britishers don't, but yeah, it's problematic. All right, thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you.
John.
I'm back. So I have a question in regard to the romantic idealism, if you call it that, of objectivism. My understanding of it is that it's supposed to be how life should be, and coming to terms with their own values, reaching our highest potential, and I 100% agree with that. I wonder if any kind of stories or art, or I'll use H.P. Lovecraft as an example, with his ghostly eldritch horror to it, despite the fact that's very professionally written. Do these things have a value in objectivist society?
So I guess I missed what exactly has a value.
Things such as
horror movies.
I'm not saying a horror movie in the colloquial sense, but I mean horrors and are you familiar with any of Lovecraft's writing, of Call of Cthulhu?
I'm not.
Yeah, no, that's okay. But stuff with demons and other crap. So, but it's very professionally written and it has high vocab to it. It's got a gripping story, but there's really no moral to it. Do these things have any value in an objectivist society? Yeah,
I mean, it depends on the quality of writing, the quality of the story, the quality of the characterization. So you can get value out of art. Leonard Peikoff has a talk. I've mentioned this on my show a few times. A survival value of great but evil themed art or non-romantic art, or he gives an example of Tolstoy, right? Tolstoy is not exactly romantic; it's the opposite. But you should read it. It has great value, and he would say, and he says in the talk, survival value, right? So it depends on how good the art is. It depends on how good it is at depending on the art form, right? At presenting what it's trying to present. So yes, it could be in any genre. And you can have a romantic horror story, right? Horror movie. a horror novel because you can have a hero who makes choices and beats the demons. So the fact that the demons are in it doesn't necessarily destroy. I know, was it Ayn Rand hated horror movies and Linda Peikoff likes them, something like that? Yeah. So it really is an issue of, is there value in something? Real value, objective value in something that is being presented. And if it's not from the theme, then maybe it's from the writing or from something else.
Yeah, I understand that. And it's unfortunate that you haven't read any Lovecraft for this example, because it's so, like, I would call it atonalism. It's very, it's very dark, it's very drab, it's very dreary. And it's got all these terrible themes and then racism, murder, etc. But it's very like articulate and compiled and very, just ripping and interesting, despite the fact that it's immoral. I love it regardless, though. I do.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you saw, I don't read as much as I should, but I have. So have you seen Breaking Bad?
Oh, are you kidding? Of course, it's reunited my relationship with my father.
Well, Breaking Bad is an amoral story with no heroes, indeed no good characters in the entire thing. Everybody is an idiot or scumbag. I can't. The FBI are complete incompetent fools. Everybody's just stupid, and the main character, the one we follow for 5-6 seasons or something, is just become more and more and more evil as the show goes on. And as really no redeeming features, I think. His sidekick is, irrational, immoral, second-handed nothing, which we all root for him to somehow survive. He should have died in the final episode. It's a travesty, a moral travesty. They kept him alive, in my view. He compromised his integrity over and over and over again. He was given tons of chances to walk away and didn't. He kept being dragged in. So he deserved to die, right? Morally, that show is reprehensible, right? From a moral theme perspective. But it had phenomenal writing. It had phenomenal, plot build-up and suspense and structure and twists that were surprises. The characters were evil, but interesting to some extent. I mean, I have to say that I thought some seasons dragged, and I, probably could have done with 3 seasons instead of 5, or even 2 seasons instead of 5. And the ultimate point that life is a slippery slope, and if you start down this path, you're gonna keep sliding. Got that 3rd episode. I don't know that I needed all the brutality that followed, but it was very, very well done. And there's an aspect of which I enjoyed it, even though that being one of the best TV shows ever produced says something about our culture, that our culture can produce dark, horrible shows about horrible people brilliantly, just brilliantly, says something about the culture in which we live, right? And
I agree.
And you're not going to find a really, really, really good, well-made show about really, really, really good heroes. It just doesn't exist.
I completely agree, and I'll let you off with behind my computer here. I have a huge Clockwork Orange poster, so we're on the right.
Oh, there you go. Talk about the ultimate in evil movies. Yeah, Clockwork Orange is is brilliant in many respects, right? But I would kill him just for using Beethoven's Fifth. Stanley Kubrick should be. I don't know what the penalty is for making me associate the Fifth with the brutality of Clockwork Orange. So yes, but it's every aspect of that movie is thought out. It's well made. It's interesting in a sick kind of way. It's brilliantly acted, and yet the theme of it is awful. And I couldn't watch it today. I'm glad I saw it when I was young. I wouldn't watch it today. Too painful. It's much, in that sense, much more powerful than Breaking Bad, even, because Breaking Bad I could watch today. I don't think I could watch Clockwork Orange again. And I watched it probably 3-4 times when I was young. So I get it. All right. Daniel.
I have a question
Thank you.
about benevolence.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that young people that I see on the street and young people at work, some of them still wear masks. And if you talk to them, they don't wear them around their family, they don't wear them at work, but whenever they're out and about, they still wear their masks. And I'm concerned that their basic attitude is that everyone I don't know is a potential threat to me. Instead of seeing them as, hey, this is someone who's providing goods and services that I use and they buy, directly or indirectly, and vice versa. They are in some way, trading with me, buying in the services and products that I make, and that, every person, from that standard is a potential value. And I just wonder how, if we've been training people that by our handling of COVID, that everyone you don't know is a threat, how do you teach benevolence? How do you convince people that there's a lot of value in 99.99% of the people that you meet on the street?
I mean, I think it's difficult. I mean, I really do think that, the worst part of it, of the mask wearing, is the children are wearing masks in federally funded, pre-K programs. Children of 2 years to 5-year-olds are wearing masks, even outdoors all the time. How do they relate to other people without watching their face, without seeing them? They are taught when they're tiny little that other people are a threat to them. How are they going to be benevolent? I mean, it's one thing for an adult. Maybe this is just a period and they get over it. But kids, God, you're instilling this at a very, very young age, and the consequences are not going to be good.
Is part of the answer, we've got to expose them to more classic art, like the Vermeer painting that's there behind you and the statue?
Yes, I mean, but that we should do in any case, COVID or no COVID, right? Yes, I think art is a powerful tool to learn about the wonders of life and the beauty of it and the incredible potential that human beings have. And I think as we just talked about with John, the sad thing is that most of good art today that is produced with bad themes that don't teach benevolence. Quite the opposite. They don't project the world as a wonderful place. Quite the opposite. So it's very hard. And how do you select the right art, and who's going to do the selection? What do parents know about art? They don't know anything. So it's very difficult. But look, COVID has been so destructive but also revealing, because it has revealed the fact that people can't think. They can't make their own risk assessments. I mean, I still see people walking outside on a breezy day with a mask on. Now, you don't need to have an IQ of 140 to know that just doesn't make sense. Now, if you're in a crowded place with a lot of people around you, and but and then young people, kids should not be wearing masks, period. COVID is not an issue for kids. It hasn't been. It is not. The probability of anything really bad happening for kids is minute. It's not worth the damage of having to deal with masks and children. It's just, but people have no capacity to make those kind of risk assessment. Now, Adam has told us in the past, he's got all kinds of comorbidities. He's pretty old, and all this stuff, right? For him, maybe it does make sense to wear a mask. But everybody is going to have to make their own assessment. And I can see that people are not doing it and they can't. They have no capacity to do it. And then, they wear a mask all day. They wear a mask outdoors. They wear a mask by the beach. But then they sit down at the restaurant and they take the mask off. Mm-hmm. As if the virus knows, oh, he's sitting at the restaurant. He must be safe. We must infect him, right? I mean, sitting at the restaurant, it's a closed environment. You've got a waiter leaning over you. God, you just, my wife probably, when she got COVID, probably got it in a restaurant, in December of 2020. So there's no sense of calibrating risk behavior and adjusting and thinking and figuring stuff out. It's just fear, follow the orders, don't think.
I saw one of my coworkers who wasn't wearing a mask, put it on, go outside. I happened to be going out at the same time. He got
Smoke.
outside.
No, I'm kidding.
Exactly. He took his mask off so he could smoke.
Yeah. I mean, it's nuts, right? He's taking something, which will probably cause him to miss a few days of work because of a cold right now, particularly with version 5, and instead replacing with something that has a high likelihood to give him lung cancer. And not just die, but die a really, really bad, unpleasant death. People have no capacity they have the capacity. They don't engage in that part of their brain. And that's what drove me crazy the most during this pandemic. The hysteria on both sides, the inability to assess risk on both sides. The people who were not going to be vaccinated no matter what, even if they have comorbidity and on their deathbed, as they're dying from COVID, refused, it still claimed that, it was bad to be vaccinated. It's shocking how irrational people can be and are outside of their work environment, outside of the specific tasks that they have to do. They do that and they completely lose it outside of it. And that's, again, another sense in which the culture is not quite ready.
And obviously some people can make the leap, right? Ayn Rand was in Russia, terrible, horrible place. And she saw tall buildings and skyscrapers in movies. And that was part of what inspired her, right? To get the heck out of Russia, say there's a better way.
Yep. It's truly, yes, people have the capacity to not do, to not just follow what everybody else does, have the capacity to use their mind, have the capacity to think outside the box, have the capacity to have reason. But reason is something that needs to be engaged, you need energy, you need to bring it forward. It requires willpower. And people are not, obviously don't do that. And it's sad to see. And COVID and Trump are the two things that have brought it out more than I've ever seen before. But in COVID, it was particularly this issue about risk and the inability to assess risk.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Let's see, Ian.
Recently, I was rereading some stuff in the Foundations of Free Society, that book on essays on Ayn Rand's political thoughts.
Yeah.
And particularly Rob Tarr's essay on the Austrian theory of value. I assume you're familiar with that.
Yep.
Which I think that essay is one of the best objectivist economic articles that I know of. It's just amazing.
Yep.
Do you know if anybody has shared that with some of the Austrians? I don't know who's active in Austrian economics these days, or if those ideas have been shared with them, the clarification, and if they have any thoughts or responses.
So I don't know of any responses. I do think that the article has been shared. I know that the article was available separate from, I think it was published in New Ideal or something. It was available separate from the book. So it was available to share as a PDF or something like that. I think attempts have been made. I'm pretty sure Pete Betke has seen. I think he got the book, and I think he's seen an article whether he's read it or not. I don't know if you know who Pete Betke is, but Pete is a prominent Austrian at George Mason University and a teacher, so a significant influence on young Austrians. I don't think there's been a response. I don't think there's a critique. And by the way, I share your assessment of the article. I do think it's one of the best, if not the best thing ever written by an objectivist on economics. It's philosophical, and I worry that the Austrians are going to struggle with that. And the Austrian philosophers, I'd be curious what somebody like Brian Kaplan would think of it. That's a good. I'll try. I don't know Brian, but I know people who know Brian. Maybe we could get in front of Brian Kaplan, because he's a libertarian philosopher, Austrian philosopher, who's very, very smart and very, very good on a lot of things. So, we disagree, obviously, and I think he's an anarchist, but he's got other stuff that's excellent, just excellent on immigration and on other issues. He's the best I've seen on immigration, and of the kind of Austrians. So somebody like that who has more of a philosophical bent, I think might be of interest. Might be of interest in that article, but unfortunately, yeah, it should be a bridge, because the article is basically saying that at the core, economic subjective value is objective value, is the socially objective value as Ayn Rand sees it, and there's the two are getting at the same thing from different perspective, but they're not in conflict. They can be, and that's a really, really important observation that leads to some important economic conclusions. And it's one of the reasons I think most objectivist intellectuals view Austrian economics very favorably, right? As the economic theory that is most reflective of reality.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I encourage people to read that essay. It really is terrific. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so I think I got everybody. I'm going to take some super chat. We've got 5 here over 20. Oh, this is going to be a long show today. All right, Michael, why is altruism and guilt so good at getting into your subconscious and haunting a person for their entire lives? If I hadn't discovered objectivism, I know I wouldn't be able to shake that curse on my own, because they relate to ethics, to morality. So the reason is that as a being, as a biological being, as human beings, we need morality. And therefore we need a code of morality, and altruism is the only code we've taught. So it goes deep, and it is hard to shake, and it impacts everything we do. And guilt is the negation of your morality. And if morality is really, really important, then that guilt is not going to be trivialized. It's going to have deep roots. And even people who are cynics, skeptics, who say, morality, I just do what works, or pragmatists. Even they can't ignore morality. They've observed morality. They know morality is important deep down, even though they won't admit it. So they are, whether they like it or not, they're going to also have this bent towards altruism and be affected by guilt, because that's the kind of species we are. We're a species that needs a moral code, i.e. that needs principled guidance on how to live. And even if we reject the idea that we need it, we still need it. Reality is what it is. And as a consequence, it has an impact on us. And guilt is one of the impacts it has on us, the negative side of that impact, but it's still an impact. All right, Hopper Campbell. Thank you, Hopper, $50. I really appreciate it. How do you know when your brain interprets the data provided by your senses, it isn't making a mistake, or only provided you with the information you need to survive? Not all the information that's actually out there, like the fourth dimension space-time. Well, I know it's not providing me with all the information. I know that. For example, when you look at a flower, you're not getting you're not seeing what a bat sees, right? A bat has a different sense, right? It sees the way sound bounces off the flower. I'm saying see, not in actual visual, but in the sense of sensing. A bat senses the way sound waves bounce off a flower. Our senses don't give us that information. So, and our senses don't give us all the information. They give us information up to our capacity to see. We don't see the molecules inside the flower. We suddenly don't see the atoms inside the flower. So what we see is what we see. Our senses have evolved to provide us with information necessary for our survival. Exactly that. You know, and but the information we get is the right information. It's not all the information. There is no such thing in a sense as all the information. There's no end to that kind of equation, right? We get the information at a level of, what's the right term? A level of, oh God, somebody like Greg was here, he'd have exactly the right term. The level of acuity, I think maybe is the right term, that is necessary for us to survive and thrive in the world. And one of the ways we know the data is not mistaken is the fact that we survive. If we didn't, if the data was not true, what would be the point? The whole mechanism of evolution is geared towards, you know, giving you the tools in order to survive, and survive. And for a human being means use your mind in order to form abstractions. It's much more than just just the seeing. So you have the relevant information. You don't have all the information. For example, you can't see what's in the distance, or you can see what's in the distance. It's fuzzier than what's close in. Partially because what's close in is right now, you know, generally evolutionarily more important than what's far away, but not always. Sometimes what's far away is the threat, and you have to deal with it. So we built telescopes. We as human beings figure out how to deal with that, so we can identify the threat of an asteroid coming towards Earth and hitting us or whatever. You know, we already fall, or telescopes to see the tiger from far away, so we can hide before he gets there, or whatever, right? So it's you know, the fact that our senses provide us with information is proof to us every single day. Every time you open your eyes and you actually get out of bed and you don't fall. And you don't, it's not an abyss. And a car doesn't run you over when you're getting out of bed, at least in most cases. You know, every day our senses are proven to be amazing, inaccurate. So there's simply no reason to assume otherwise. It's a completely arbitrary statement to say the senses are not providing you with accurate information. They are. They're just not providing you with all the information within the limits of acuity. Like a dog can hear sounds that a human can't. Oh, our senses don't give us, well, within the range of what they provide us true sounds, what's really there, right? And the same is true of every one of our senses. Hopefully that answers life. Now the fourth dimension space-time, you know, it's not clear that there is a fourth dimension in the sense of the three-dimensional. Three-dimensional is the spatial relationships. It's not clear that time is a spatial dimension. I don't think it is. So it might be in some, if you're doing math, it might be easy to think about time as a fourth dimension, like in Einstein's relativity theory. But you can't think of it as a spatial dimension, right? And that's why you can never see time, because it's, you know, and according to objectivism, time is not a dimension at all, I don't think, because it's a relationship. But that is beyond my pay grade. All right, real evil, elvish, not evil, sorry, elvish rope. Hey, Ron, huge fan from Southern Ontario, Canada. I'm curious, what are your thoughts about the 4-day work week movement that has been gaining traction around the world, and what pros and cons come with it? Thanks in advance. You know, I don't have an opinion about the 4th-day work week. Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. I just don't want government involved. If it's a voluntary thing and companies think that 4 days people will be more productive than they are on 5 days, cool. I don't know what the right number of days to work is. Does anybody? I mean, when I was growing up in Israel, we had a 6-day work week. It was you got off Saturday. That was it. We went to school 6 days a week. And I came to America and suddenly it's 5 days. That was pretty cool as a kid, right? Suddenly you got 2 days off on the weekend. In Israel, you only got 1 day and everything was fine. And then today you get 2 days. I can imagine a 4-day work week. I can imagine different people having different lengths of time, right? Different work weeks. Why standardize? Some activities require standardization because if you're in a manufacturing job, you have to be there at the same time John is because you're doing complementary things. But most jobs today are not like that. And most jobs of the future are not going to be like that because those kind of jobs are going to be automated. So people should work as much as they want to and as much as people are willing to pay them. And it's a voluntary issue between employers and employees. And the state should get out of the business, and there should be no necessarily standardized work week. And the same with school. I don't know how many days of school is right. I don't know. I think if we have a standardized work week, school probably should match that because otherwise it'll be super inconvenient. But other than that, maybe if you have good school, maybe schooling, if you're homeschooling, is 7 days a week. Maybe it's 7 days a week, but shorter days. Maybe it's only 3 days a week, but it's really, really intense. I don't know. All of those are good questions to ask from a productivity perspective, from a learning perspective, from a specialized perspective. There's no philosophical answer to that question. Okay, Michael asks, a lot of leftists talk about the prison industrial complex as though mass incarceration is due to prison privatization. Is there any merit to this, or is mass incarceration primarily a product of a Christian Puritan culture? I think mass incarceration is primarily a consequence of our attempt to prohibit drugs and a criminalization of drugs, and in the past of alcohol. So yes, I think most of the incarceration is primarily a consequence of a Christian Puritan culture and the consequence of an attempt to dictate morality from the government down instead of just leaving us to live our lives and protect our rights and leave us alone. But I can see why people blame the private prison system. I don't think prisons should be private. There's just a weird incentive structure there. And, I think this is part of the function of government. Force is a function of government. To outsource, I don't like private armies. I don't like the US military hiring security forces to go and patrol Iraq. If a job is necessary for the military should do it. If a job is necessary for the police function, that is prison, then the police should do it. I don't think it should be outsourced. And then, there is a certain incentive if you outsource them, and then the prisoners get paid based on how many prisoners you have. There's an incentive to have more prisoners rather than less. If you get paid, you allow the prisoners to work and you reap all the profits from their work, true Marxist exploitation because you're using a gun. There's something just not right. I don't think prisoners should work. Maybe they should do something to pay for their keep, but they shouldn't be competing with the private sector that's outside of the prison. So it should be something that's pretty self-sufficient. That's my best thinking about prisons. James, I used to think it would take a lot more mysticism and collectivism than universities can muster to make the West fall. But I'm starting to think maybe those envious losers will get their wish after all. Who are the envious losers? I'm not sure who the losers are. The universities? Yeah, I mean, it certainly looks like the enemies of Western civilization are gaining. It certainly looks like they are increasing their power and their influence. Whether the West falls, how it looks for the West to fall, what that looks like, I don't know. I mean, it's easy to be pessimistic. It's easy to envision the end of days. Well, I hate to say we're wired for it, but there's something about the human experience that we always seek doom and gloom. We're always convinced the world's going to end tomorrow. Millennial cults have always existed. I mean, the latest millennial cult is climate change. It's just a millennial. I mean, Greta is a prophet of a millennial cult around climate change. That's all she is. And it always has existed. And it's easy for us as objectivists to know what the truth is and know to easily see the dominoes all fall and the whole of civilization go away. It takes longer and more convoluted routes than one would expect. I still think I don't see it's going to be hard to stop. I'm still think we can stop it, but it's going to be very, very hard to stop it at this point, given the level of mysticism, the level of collectivism, and in the culture, and certainly what the universities are teaching these days. They're teaching us not to think, and they're teaching kids not to think, and they're teaching adults not to think. We saw that in COVID, the consequence of that, and we're going to see that more and more in this culture as we move into the future, unfortunately, unless we can somehow reverse trend. And, you know, a lot of it is going to be about educational institutions. All right. Wow. We have a ton of super chat questions. What is going on here? Yeah, there they are. Yeah, a lot of $5, $10, $2 super chat questions, which is great. So let's do this. Let's do a quick round with we now have 4. Ian has left us. So please, short questions, quick short questions. I'll try to be quick in my answers so we can get to answering all of these super chats that have come in. Okay, let's start with Adam.
Have you seen the contemporary Korean TV series that has Itaewon in the title? It's something like Itaewon style, although I'm not sure.
I have not. Lots of people have recommended it to me, but I have not seen it yet. And I have to say, I've not yet connected with a contemporary Korean show. I've tried a bunch of them, and none of them have really connected. There's something, I don't know, Itaewon Class.
Itaewon Class, yeah.
So a lot of people here have recommended that. I haven't tried that one yet. It's next on my list. We'll see if I can if I watch that. I'm going to be in Korea in 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. So I'm actually, yeah, I now I'm more excited. I'm unfortunately probably not going to make it to the Mr. Sunshine theme park. There is a Mr. Sunshine theme park in Korea, which has all the buildings from the show, and you can walk around and the costumes and all of that. But, you know, unfortunately, I probably won't make it this time. All right, I will add your recommendation to the list of recommendations, Adam. Is that right?
Yes.
Good. All right, Jennifer.
I just want to say I'm really glad you guys didn't get really hurt.
Yeah,
And I'm done for today. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, it was scary. Daniel.
There was a title of a Daily Skim article that said, "The Land of the Free got some caveats this year." And the point of the article is that in the US, we have very little paid leave. They think we should have 18 weeks for birth, adoption, so forth and so on. What about this idea that you can't be free unless somebody gives you these benefits?
Yes, I mean, that is the European view. That is the kind of, if you've seen the European Declaration of Rights, they have 300 and something rights that people have. You have a right to a job, and you have the right to so many days off, and you have a right to August taking off for vacation, and you have all of these rights. That is the perception of, you know, go back to FDR, Roosevelt, right? And his 4 freedoms, right? The job of government is to bring about these freedom from fear. The government is going to stop you from fearing. It's going to prevent you from being ever being afraid. Freedom from want, That's the welfare state. I forget what the other two are. Freedom from, but that's the beginning of it in America, right? Well, the progressives, FDR is very influenced by the progressives. The left is very, very good at taking words and shifting their meaning. And they did that with liberal, they've done it with freedom, they've done it with justice. They do it with almost every concept we have. Freedom used to be understood as the absence of coercion, as the living in a world in which one could make one's own decisions and be guided by one's own mind in pursuit of one's own values. But that is a revolution. That understanding of freedom is part of the revolution, and it's not going to. It goes back to altruism. It goes back to everything we've been talking about forever. It's the whole package of the philosophy. It's not going to be. People are not going to get freedom without all of that.
If you read Biden's fact sheet on some of the new taxes, it says he's a capitalist.
Yep. Oh yeah. Elizabeth Warren has said she's a capitalist. So even capitalism is not our term. And these leftists I debate claim they're capitalists. And its words have lost all meaning to these people. And when you say, but if that's capitalism, then everything's everything's capitalism. And they go, yeah, well, yeah, capitalism is pretty much everywhere. They have no problem with contradictions. This is what they've been taught. They have no problem with contradictions. They have no problem with everything being gray, that everything being undefined, unspecified, blurry. They're fine with all of that. That's the generation we've got today.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Daniel. John.
Where do you think this, for lack of a better word, righteousness comes from with modern day religious conservatives, in the respect that it's okay to be, for lack of a better word, as greedy as possible, but things such as sex and stuff is off the limits? Like, why is sex demonized from a religious standpoint, but the fact that greed seems to be okay, despite the fact that Jesus preached altruism?
Well, it's becoming less okay among conservatives. So conservatives want to, we've got a movement on the right which is anti-greed as well. But the reason they care more about sex, and they care more about abortion, and they care more about prayer in the school and things like that than they do about greed, is because their Christianity teaches them that what matters is a spiritual world. What matters is spiritual activity, and they view sex as spiritual. They view abortion as the spirit of God in the fetus, and they view prayer and these other things as fundamentally spiritual. And they view the material world as, what difference does it make, right? It's not that important. We're all sinners after all. So, you go after material stuff. That's not what God is really concerned about. What he's really concerned about is your spiritual state, your spiritual condition. Martin Luther had a really good quote. I wish I could quote it by heart. I can't. But he basically says, because there's this debate about usury, and the Catholic Church banned usury. And one of the innovations Martin Luther said, yeah, let them charge interest. It's a horrible sin, but not everything in the world is a horrible sin. We live in a world of sin. This world is a material world. It sucks. It's terrible. It's horrible. It's evil. We are evil creatures. In the afterlife, there won't be sin. In the afterlife, there's no capitalism. In the afterlife, there's no greed. In heaven, there's no greed, right? This life, what we should be concerned about is the spiritual, because that's what matters to God. And the Protestants, now the Catholics, this is why Catholics tend to be statists, much more than Protestants, because the Catholics, they want to control everything. The Protestants, primarily it's the spiritual. This is Luther's attitude. This world, the material world, is evil and horrible and dirty and disgusting and anyway, right? So it doesn't matter what you do in it. It's the spiritual world that matters. And the Catholics a little bit more positive about the world, and they want to control it. The left, spin this on the left. The left, and this is a point Rand makes, the left, on the other hand, is materialist, right? Marxists are materialists. So they don't believe in a spiritual world. So you can do whatever you want in the spiritual world. You can be complete subjectivist. You can sleep with anybody. You can have any kind of ideas. All of that doesn't matter. What matters is we control the material world, because that's what matters. Materialism, it's all about this material world. So we control you in the material world and leave you free, quote, in the spiritual world. Now that has changed, right? So the left today is far less Marxist. Today, the left is not materialist in that sense. Today, the left wants to control both the spiritual and the materialist. And the right today wants to control both the spiritual and the material. That's why we live in so, it feels so awful right now in the world, because we've got both parties. There used to be a balance you could kind of attain. At least when the Democrats won, you had free speech. When the Republicans won, you had economic freedom. Now you don't get freedom with either one of them. You lose all your freedoms with both. Does that make sense?
Completely, I agree.
Thanks, Sean. All right, let's run through these. First, we'll start with the $50 one. Thanks, thanks, Emmanuel. Although I'm not sure I can answer. I'm not sure I can give you a quick answer for this. What is the objective interpretation of probability? When we say the probability of an event is 75%, what does 75% refer to in reality? Every interpretation of probability I've seen doesn't seem objectivist. Doesn't seem objective. I mean, this is a tough question, and it's something we don't really have much in the objectivist literature about, and we need to think it through. So I'm actually helping to organize a seminar with a bunch of objectivist philosophers and people who use probability, because probability is very, very, very useful. We use it in finance all the time, use it in science all the time, use it in insurance all the time, we use it all the time. And so it has to have an objective meaning because of its practical nature. And so we're organizing a seminar to really think about exactly this question and try to understand it. So I will give you a better answer once, well, I will give you an answer. I'm not sure I can give you any answer today. Once we do that seminar, I think the seminar is actually, it's a while off still. I think it's going to be in June of next year. I'm looking forward to it. This is a question that really, I mean, it's hit home. I mean, think about it for a long time, but it really hit home when I read, which I recommend reading. What's his name? The guy that wrote Enlightenment Now. He just wrote a book in defense of reason. And that book deals a lot. For him, reason is almost all probabilistic thinking, right? And Steven Pinker, thank you. Steven Pinker, for him, reason is probabilistic thinking. Now that can be right, but it can't be that probabilities don't have objective meaning. They have to have objective meaning. Now, part of it is certainly frequency, right? So what does it mean to say an event is likely to happen? There's 75% probability that it happens. It means that historically, under these specific conditions, but not knowing all the causal relationships, right? Not knowing all the causal, because if you know all the causal relationship, you should be able to say with 100% certainty what will happen. But without knowing but with these general conditions, this event happens 75% of the time. Now, I think Bayesianism also needs to be put on, objective grounds, because I don't think Bayesian is nonsense. I think there's something there, but it needs to be thought through in terms of how to put it on objective grounds. I mean, generally, the philosophy of science, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in philosophy of science, a lot of work to be done in philosophy of science. And this is a cross between the philosophy of math, the probability part of it, and the philosophy and epistemology. And I think there's important work to be done here. There's a lot of work to be done here, and it's super exciting. But it's it has to be objective, and then the question is how to use it, when to use it, and how to deal with it. Because one of the questions is, how do you square probability with causality, and how do you decide, what is the same and what is different in every situation? But it's a tricky question that I think can be made objective, and we're certainly going to try. Yes, and your confusion is not unusual. It's an important issue. It's a really important issue, and so much of our knowledge about the world has a probabilistic element to it, right? And it's important for us to at least understand what that even means and how to relate to it. All right. All right. Let's go over these. I've got a bunch of these. These will have to be short answers. Let's start. And by the way, we're 188 short of a goal, $188 short of a goal, if anybody is interested. So we raised $460, another 188 to reach the 650. Let's see. Wyatt says, I've heard objectivists talking about making money with Blake Scholes' boom. Is it safe to assume you're also cashing in on seeing his value early? No, I did not invest in Boom. I did when Boom was raising money. I did not have money, so I never got in on that. It's still a long way before you'll be able to cash in on that. That is, while Boom is in the headlines, and while Boom is raising a lot of money, has raised a lot of money. I think $600 million so far. It's going to need to raise billions of dollars still to get to the point where they actually produce the aircraft, and it's going to be a long time before they're public and actually people can cash out, or sell. I don't know if the company might sell at some point rather than go public, but I am not part of that. I hope a bunch of objectives make a lot of money, and share it on the UN Book Show. Liam says, how can Kant be the father of nihilism if he prescribed an objective moral code that must be universally accepted? What works of his actually promote nihilism? God, that's a big question that requires a lengthy answer. But the short thing is, his moral code is not objective. It's the opposite of objective. It's intrinsic. It's an intrinsicist moral code, and intrinsicism is always subjectivism, because there is nothing intrinsic, so it turns into subjective. There's nothing objective about his moral code. It's a moral code of dogma and duties, which are imposed on you by somehow categorical imperatives that are intrinsic in you, but nobody can find them. Nobody knows them, right? So they're just somehow there. So Kant's whole morality is intrinsicist, and therefore ultimately subjectivist, and therefore all of the moral codes and ideologies that have come after him, whether they go the intrinsicist route or the subjectivist route, he is the father of them. So nihilism is just one of the routes that Kant doesn't advocate for nihilism. He's not a nihilist in that sense. He's the father of nihilism in the sense that his ideas necessitate nihilism as the outcome. That is, nihilism is ultimately a consistent application of Kantian ideas, even if he couldn't recognize them. And that is, those ideas are basically a separation of reason from reality, turning morality or turning morality away from reality. You know, Locke, at the very least, Locke is trying to establish morality on the basis of nature. Well, we have no nature. Kant takes nature away. So you have to establish morality based on some categorical imperative, something random, something subjective in the end, something completely subjective. And subjectivism together with no reason, because if you take away the connection between the mind and reality, what are you left with? You're left with emotions, you're left with whims. So what does whim worship lead to? Nihilism. It necessitates nihilism. So nihilism is the end of Kantian philosophy. It's not the thing Kantian philosophy advocates for, it's the consequence of it, even if Kant didn't realize it. That's the best short answer I can give. James asks, is observation equivalent to scientific method? It doesn't seem as rigorous. No, of course not. Observation is one aspect of the scientific method. The scientific method is one element of the scientific method is observation. But observing what? How? Then what? What do you do with the observation? You have to abstract from it. So it's a piece in a sequence of things that constitute the scientific method. Wow, you guys are asking a lot of epistemology questions today and challenging me. Michael asks, why do people know more about anarcho-capitalism than objectivism? Whenever I bring up radical free market ideas, people say you are an ANCAP. When will objectivism be what the cool kids are into? I don't know. But one reason ANCAP is more popular is because it's less demanding. It's like, it's consistent with altruism, it's consistent with subjectivism, it's consistent with nihilism, it's consistent with whatever you want it to be. So you don't have to give it consistent with Christianity, it's consistent with whatever you want it to be. So it's a completely whatever, right? And it's Ayn Rand called the equivalent of the ANCAPs hippies of the right, and she was right. It's a kind of a philosophy of whatever. And that's easier for people to understand and to accept than, whoa, particular epistemology. You have to go by reason, a particular moral code, 7 virtues, a real system, a real philosophy. That's much harder, much harder. But we have to get beyond that. So the less thinking a culture is, the more ANCAPs will be popular. ANCAPs is the smart, unthinking attracted to anarcho-capitalism, which is a contradiction in terms I've said many times. Harper Campbell, will the third world continue getting richer despite growing statism? I don't know. There's a real risk it doesn't, which will be very sad. What will the third world learn from the rise of statism? Will it encourage them to become statists? Who will they trade with as the rest of the world hunkers down in onshoring? We're going to bring manufacturing back. If everybody brings manufacturing back, who's going to trade? Who are the third world going to trade with? Now, I'm not pessimistic about it. I'm pretty optimistic. I think the third world will continue getting richer because they have enough lessons that hopefully they can learn at least some. It turns out a little bit of freedom goes a long way, and they can mimic a little bit of freedom. I also see places like Africa forming free trade alliances. So like most of Africa today is one free trade zone between the different countries in Africa. Ultimately, that'll help them become richer. So I do think third world countries are going to get richer, but at a slower pace. No question, a slower pace than is possible. Harper Campbell, are we seeing population decreases because people are becoming more educated and middle class and are choosing to have less kids? Or is it because people are more cynical about the future? I think it's both, right? So suddenly the decrease from having 8 kids to 2 to 4 is a decrease that has to do with being educated middle class. And also that has to do with the fact that kids are not dying. It has to do with child mortality. So as countries become richer, fewer kids die, and therefore you have fewer kids because they're going to survive. So you don't have to diversify. Having lots of kids is a form of diversification. It's also an issue of the children don't have to take care of their parents because the parents can save, because they can produce more than they consume and therefore save. So the kids don't have to work for the parents. So you can have fewer kids. So you do. So you have 2 to 4 kids. Why does it go from 2 to 4 kids to 0 or to 0 to 1? I think that has to do with the cynicism about the future. And you see it, the more cynical the culture is, the fewer kids they have. The more pessimistic they are, the fewer kids they have. James asked, is it more likely the next few decades will be ugly spiritually, sluggish economically, but not homicidal, mystical, and dictatorial? It's possible that it just becomes ugly spiritually and sluggish economically, but unlikely, because sluggish economically and ugly spiritually usually leads to dictatorial and bloody. So I don't see how people don't rebel against sluggish economically and ugly spiritually. Now, we could be slightly ugly spiritually and chugging along economically without really going into depression, but just somehow eking out small economic growth. And maybe we putz around like that for a few decades before we either go full laissez-faire or go full authoritarian. Maybe that's the outcome. Prediction is hard and not recommended. I mean, you got to think about the future, but it's very hard to actually predict it in detail. Harper asks, is gravity actually a force or just curves on the fabric of fourth dimension time-space? Really? Really? You're asking me this question? How the hell do I know? I have no idea. Now, again, I don't think time is a dimension. Whatever it is, I don't think it's a dimension in the sense that we understand dimensions. Time is a measurement of movement. What exists is movement. Now, this is a question for Harry Binswanger and not for me, but I don't know what gravity is. I don't think anybody really knows, but I think it's probably a force. Paulo Zeus says, keep on going. I'm not going anywhere. All right. Michael says, have you been to or considered seeing a therapist at some point in your life? I have not. Doesn't mean you shouldn't. I just have not. I think about as psychologically healthy as the people I know. I'm on the healthy side of the spectrum. So I have not. I know a lot of, but I know a lot of people who have, and I know a lot of people who should see a therapist. So I'm very pro-therapist generally, even though I have never seen one. Michael asks, why was Bill Clinton forced to say the era of big government is over? Seems like we had a real moment in the 80s and 90s and we somehow blew it. Yeah, we did. And we did have a moment in the 80s and 90s. There was a general consensus that big government was a disaster, that it had led to the disastrous policies of the 60s and 70s, that it led to stagflation, to unemployment, that it was not a force for good. That's how Reagan got elected ultimately, and that had momentum up until George Bush. And Bush is the pivot away from it, really 9/11, but even before that, Bush's, passionate conservatism was a move away from that. And I think that, it's just accelerated away from that attitude with Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden. I mean, that is a sequence of people, each one wanting government to be bigger and have a bigger role. We've moved away from individualism, away from personal responsibility, and away from limited government, and towards both the right and the left embracing government as involved in managing our lives in one way or another. All right, Liam, does Dr. Peikoff think we've reached a turning point? I've basically a point of no return, not a turning point, a point of no return. I don't think I should comment on what Leonard thinks. I think he should, if he wants to comment, he will at some point, or he won't. but I don't think it should be filtered through me. It does nobody any good for me to do that. Michael, does your subconscious engage in reason? When an infant first develops language, is that reason? No, your subconscious, the integrations necessary are an aspect of reason, but the full-fledged, even an infant has to focus their mind in order to start the process going. So the reason is at least a significant chunk of what happens under the guise of reason is guided by a conscious mind. It doesn't mean all the work, some of the work is done by the senses, but it's guided by a conscious mind, by a conscious effort, by conscious effort. Liam, 400 years from now, when every nation on the planet is objectivist, do we only see separate nations in case one goes bad? If none would ever went bad, why would we need separate nations? We don't. I mean, by then maybe we have multiple planets, and maybe people on Earth are all one nation, and the people on Mars are a different nation, and the people in the asteroids are being oppressed, and they want a revolution. Now I'm channeling that TV show that I really like. That I forgot its name. Anyway, somebody will remind me. Yeah, the only reason you need multiple nations is just in case. But there's no beyond that. I don't know of any reason, but it's reason enough. It's reason enough to keep it. Michael asks, in England, banks are starting to do 50-year mortgages that your kids can take over. Is this a good idea, or a sign that unaffordable housing is the new norm in the West? I mean, 50-year mortgage is a great idea when there's no inflation. But no bank is going to do a 50-year mortgage fixed rate for 50 years today in England or anywhere else. So maybe in England, they were starting to do that a few years ago when interest rates looked like they were going to be zero forever. If banks did that, they are going to get screwed in a big, big way. Inflation is terrible for lenders who lent fixed rate long term. In England in the 19th century, loans were being made for 100 years, 100-year loans, 100-year bonds, because people knew that inflation was basically zero and will always be zero until it wasn't. So not good policy for the bank. Great for borrowers. I take a 50-year mortgage right now. Love it. The Expanse is the name of the show. Thank you, Joe. The Expanse, a good sci-fi show on Prime, on Amazon Prime. Really good, particularly the first season. Wow, we still got a bunch of questions. God, and we're 188 short. Somebody step in here with a $100 question or something. All right, Michael asks, what makes me furious? Are the intellectuals who are going to cling on to the mixed economy for the next 100 years, not realizing how much they are holding humanity back in incalculable ways? Yes, me too. Absolutely, Michael. All right, Gail has stepped in. $50. Thank you, Gail. Do you think nomad capitalist Andrew Henderson is a friend of objectivism? I mean, I don't know. I don't know how philosophical he is. I don't know. I don't know how philosophical he is. I think the idea of he helps people find the best place to live given their circumstances around the world, and he's certainly pro freedom and an individual choice. I support his work. I think it's good stuff. I'm sure a lot of people are pissed off at him because he encourages people to leave the U.S., but not me. But I don't know how close he is to objectivism. I've been encouraged to interview him. I think he's contacted me a few times to try to arrange an interview. I haven't done it yet. I'll try at some point, and maybe we'll discover if he has a relationship to objectivism, and if so, what it is. He generally is pro-capitalism. He's generally pro-capitalism, anti-redistribution, anti-regulation. But how, a friend of objectivism is really an issue of philosophical foundations. So I just don't know. Okay, Frank asks, have you read J.R. Tolkien, Rand's essay about Attila and the Witch Doctor? Is evidence in some of his works with kings depending on evil advisors. Yeah, I mean, I think the idea that the idea of Attila and the Witch Doctor is a reflection of reality, and as such, has always been in the part of the mythology and the storytelling and the books and novels. So I don't think the reality of Attila and the Witch Doctor is new. What is new is her identification of it, and her identification of it as a principle, kind of an idea that is a thread through history, and the explanation of why it exists, why it's needed, why the bad guys need it, what they get from each other, why they survive, why the people don't overthrow them, all of that, everything else that's in that essay for the new intellectual, that's new. But the actual characterization of Attila and the Witch Doctor, that is a strong man who needs an evil intellectual to help him, that I think is people probably observed and fictionalized and saw in history. They just didn't see the big picture, the abstract ideas that animate that. Michael asks, it amazes me how little capitalism we have produces so much wealth. We can afford to support an intellectual parasite class dedicated to its own destruction. Yes, it is truly amazing how a little bit of freedom goes a long way. You can create a lot of wealth. Just look at China with a little bit of freedom. Imagine what they could do if they had a lot of freedom. Truly, truly amazing. All right, we're down to short $138. So $350 questions and we're done. James asks, given what happened to Salman Rushdie, do you think political violence will get to the point where you'll need to bring bodyguards to speak on stage? I'm going to say I hope so, but not in the sense that I hope political violence increases, but in the sense that even today, if I became prominent enough, I would need bodyguards. So I want to be prominent enough so that I need bodyguards. That's my goal in life, is to have bodyguards. Because I say outrageous things that piss off a lot of people if they heard it. They don't hear it. I want to piss them off. I want to get them to the point where they want to fight me, right? Where they want to demonstrate. I did that after 9/11. So after 9/11, I did have bodyguards, not bodyguards, but I had security at every one of my talks. I wore for quite a while, for many of my talks, I wore a bulletproof vest. I had protesters. I was attacked on a number of different occasions by protesters. So it happened after 9/11. I want to sustain it. I want them to come after me because I advocate for self-interest or for capitalism. That would be my goal. But I don't see it happening anytime soon, unfortunately. Antifa maybe, but I want big demonstrations. I want thousands of people to be out there every time I come and speak, yelling and screaming and wanting to kill me. That will mean I've succeeded, right? That will mean we are winning. So that sense I want it. Not as long as I'm under the radar, even if political violence increases, they probably are not coming after me. Michael asks, I often hear the objection that objectivist arguments are circular. Why are people making this mistake? Well, because we always connect objectivism to reality. And they're not used to that. They're used to some kind of long chain of abstractions that goes nowhere. And if you actually connect it to reality, they don't know what to do with that. And I think that's why they mistakenly assert circularity. Liam, what percentage of people today have souls? I think the vast majority are dead behind their eyes, either unfocused, drifting, or superficial, narrow-minded narcissists. Sadly, I agree with you, Liam. I think a majority of people don't have souls in the full sense of what we mean, a self-created soul. That's rare. And some people create parts of them, but not a whole. It's very rare. James asks, are Asian cultures less nihilistic? Yeah, I think they are. They didn't have Kant. They need to have, they are in many respects, you know, nihilism is an affliction of the wealthy. They're too busy trying to survive to be nihilistic. They value their lives because they know how precious they are. They know how easily destroyed they are. They're still poor enough for that. I think nihilism is something of intellectuals, and you need some wealth. Hopper Campbell, would you say communism lost but fascism won? Yeah, I think so. I think the future is fascist, not communist. It serves the interest of those in charge much better. It's easier to manage for them. They can still try to grow an economy. I think China today is fascist, not communist. And I think that's the model of the future, because you can still give people enough economic freedom so that they think they own property, so that they behave as if they do, so they have incentive to produce. Communism doesn't have that. And therefore, I think results in poverty much faster than fascism. You can still have some limited wealth creation. Michael, did you like the HBO series Band of Brothers? I did. You know, it's not romantic art, but it was dramatic and very educational and very interesting, and it's an era in history that's very interesting. So I did like the show, and I thought they built out the relationships quite good, and they explained kind of the history and what was going on, and the horror of war and what it does to people bodily and to their soul quite well, and a very well made show. Hopper asks, what exactly is measurement emission? Why is it so groundbreaking in epistemology? Wow, that's a $5 question. Measurement emission is when you take a category like chairs, and they all have certain characteristic in common, but some are big, some are small, some have. So what you're doing is taking away the specific measurements of their characteristics. Some are thick, some are thin, some are made of wood to the extent that the material they're made of is a measurement. You abstract away from all those measurements, right? You omit the particulars, and what you keep is the abstraction, the basic unit. That is, we'll have to devote more time to that one, because it's super important, but I can't answer it kind of on one foot. I'm trying to think of another example. Love. All right, so love. So love is a concept that you know, is about a certain type of esteem you have for another, but it doesn't tell you how much, right? So you can love your children, you can love your wife, you can love flowers. So what you omit is all the particulars, the measurements, the particular measurements of, you predict the scope of it, the strength of it, you predict the particulars of it, and what you've got is this is the emotion. The loved one probably doesn't work quite as well, because I'm not sure it's exactly the same category or the same concept. Love, children, wife, one's romantic love, one's not, but it's not about reproduction at all. It's about the values that it represents, the value they represent to you, but what you're omitting is the particular value, and what you're both omitting the particular value and the particular intensity. By saying you love something, you're not saying how much or what it is exactly you love. Right. So that one requires a longer explanation, We are not determined by evolution. Evolution sets certain groundworks, but it doesn't determine us. Evolution does not determine who I will love. Evolution does not determine, it gives me the capacity to do it, but it doesn't determine what I love. It doesn't determine the capacity to love, and it doesn't determine that I form the concept of love. Indeed, there are certain cultures that never form the concept of love. The forming of a concept is a human abstract achievement that is forming the concept. And we're talking about concept formation. We're not talking about the emotion itself. We're talking about the concept that represents that emotion. So evolution doesn't form our concepts for us. Evolution doesn't give us concepts. We're not born with concepts. So evolution just gives us the biology to make all of that possible. It gives us the framework to make it possible. But the cultures that don't have the concept of love, the cultures that don't have the concept of chair, because they don't have chairs. You sit on the ground. So if you sit on the ground, you never form the concept chair. If you don't have multiple different types of chairs, you don't really have if you don't actually have things you sit on that are produced by man, then you don't have, so sitting on a rock does not make it a chair, right? So you never form the concept chair. So concept is something that requires human beings to form. And the fact that some languages don't have some concepts just suggests that it's not evolutionary. Just not evolutionary. All right, last question. Before you go, Linda, last question. Corey says, time is a measure of motion. That's right. It is not literally out there, apart from us. It is a certain perspective on motion. At least that is my understanding. That is my understanding as well. I don't exactly know how to fit that in with Einstein physics, but I don't have to, and I don't really care to. I'll let the physicists and the philosophers of science deal with that one. Wow, we were very epistemological today. Hold on to those questions, because we should really have those questions answered by people who could give you better answers than me doing it on the fly. Whew, okay, I'm exhausted. We didn't make our goal, which is disappointing given that I just came back from a long hiatus, but I'm sure we'll do better tomorrow. So tomorrow we're going to talk about student debt. We're going to talk about paying back student debt. Thank you, Valdrin. I appreciate the support. And we'll talk about the Biden's attempt to make it all go away. That should be a fun show. I'll talk to you all tomorrow. Have a great week. And don't forget to like the show before you leave, and support the show on Patreon, Subscribestar, or you're on bookshow.com/support. Thanks to our panelists. Thanks for all your support. Thanks for the questions. I'll see you all tomorrow. Bye, everybody.